Hello and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Data Analytics Chat, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges in the data and AI space. Today, got a new topic for us where we explore the impact of ML and AI in the investment industry. So I'm delighted to welcome a new guest, Limor Gultchin, who is the VP of ML and AI at Berkshire Partners, who are a Boston-based investment company. So welcome, Limor.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, happy to. As you already mentioned, my name is Limor Gultchin. I'm currently at Berkshire Partners doing everything that has to do with machine learning and AI, which is a lot actually these days. And we're going to talk about that a bit more, which means I'm touching both internal operations and help with the investment process, as well as spending a lot of time with our portfolio companies, which is where we are invested, seeing a lot of interesting trends across, some of them shared, some of them with their own unique challenges. So we're going to be discussing that. My path led me to Berkshire Partners after doing about 8 years of machine learning research. I started doing research in undergrad, actually working on natural language problems like humor in word embeddings. Back when word embeddings were still Word2Vec, that was a cutting edge technology of the day, which mostly allowed us to make single word predictions, maybe representations of single sentences, stuff of that kind, parallelograms, trying to build analogies of how words relate to each other. For example, man to woman is king to queen, right? Something of that kind. Those types of analogies. And overall, we were trying to see whether we could build small jokes or do predictions on different humor preferences across users based on this very rudimentary technology, which at the time seemed incredibly cutting edge. But then fast forward 5 years or so, and now you're getting humor out of the box, including any kind of language capability that goes with that. In fact, I wrote a research paper together with Adam Kalai, who I was working with at the time. He's today at OpenAI. And we were concluding that when language models will just have a better representation of the world, humor would come as a free gift out of that. And that's exactly what happened. It's a lot faster than we thought would happen. So that's a little bit about my beginnings. And then I continued doing research in a variety of settings, including at a think tank in London, where we were looking at patterns of speech of different political leaders, and then going into a master's and a PhD where I was focusing on other types of modeling and causal inference problems and so forth. I was doing research internships across the tech industry and places like Google and DeepMind, and then ChatGPT came out to the world. And that changed a lot of things for a lot of people. A lot of research programs have changed, but also the ability to do actual applied AI work within businesses has shifted tremendously. And I'm sure we're going to cover that as part of our chat today. That's really what sparked my jump into working with Berkshire Partners or working in the real world rather than in the lab publishing research papers. But happy to, go with that if it sparks any questions.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how people progress into their careers, really, isn't it? Because I think now you've got so many different routes. I think obviously you can come from any industry now, can't you? Really, across the board, marketing, finance. Obviously, as long as you've got the background academics to progress, it all adds value, doesn't it, to your role? So I guess what inspired you to get into this world? Because it's a popular topic now, isn't it? Everyone wants to get involved, but it's obviously also for juniors, it is quite challenging to get into the field, isn't it?
Yeah. I think what drew me in as part of my studies and then in research is just the breadth of use cases that you can work with the same kind of building blocks. I think the reason why data science is fascinating and then going forward to machine learning and AI from that is that you can really get insights about the world regardless of the domain you're working in. And I think that's what I love about my job at Berkshire too, which is we're just working across industries and across problems that can be super varied, but we're taking the same kind of collaborative approach where we can bring our skills and then we couple it with the domain expertise that we have, let's say, across our portfolio. And we gather insights together. We get to the fundamentals of how do you make decision making that is actually based on data and evidence rather than based on general trends or frameworks or sentiments, stuff of that kind. So that's why I think the field is so compelling, and it's worth really getting to the bottom of how do you build robust models, how do you build robust evaluations to get us at the end to the point of how do we make better decisions.
Yeah, no, like you said, solving clients' problems, because obviously you saw with the LLM boom, a lot of businesses went sidetracked, in my opinion, because they just thought that's the new shiny toy. But really, yeah, I think you need to stay with what's the key problem you've got in your business, and then look, how can you apply techniques to solve that, and then you can move on. Because like you see with LLMs, like it's great. Obviously, it's amazing what it's done, but it's also created businesses so much more problem, isn't it? Because you've got to now get all the data quality, and as soon as you change anything, I think with a business, it's going to change. So then that's going to create more problems, but also like opportunities, isn't it?
I think that's true for fundamentally any technology. I think LLMs definitely have a lot of promise in their generalizability, right? They're general agents. They can do a lot. They can do ingestion of data. They can do analysis of data. They can do formulations and generation of outputs across domains and across modalities in ways that we couldn't. Previously, we needed individual models to do all of these things. So I think that creates both a lot of promise, but also potentially challenges. They are probabilistic models. They have non-deterministic outputs. You need to learn how to tame them and put the right guardrails in place and make sure that you're asking the right questions in the form of the prompt and in the form of the context that you provide them to generate an answer. So I think there's both in that. And the question is, how do you build the right structure around them, both from a technical standpoint, but also from a team standpoint? You need to bring the domain expertise to the table. You need to have close monitoring and evaluation of the outputs. You need to get rapid feedback and a lot of it. So all of these things come together. I do agree with you, though, that it is just one more tool in our toolbox, which is generally machine learning and data analysis and data science more generally. And you need to pick the right tool for the right problem. There are new problems that couldn't have been tackled with other tools, and still you need to go to LLMs for. But that is not true for all problems. And in fact, a lot of times we start by a discussion of LLMs, and then we end up realizing that there are a lot more associated problems, and it's a longer chain that requires multiplicity of solutions.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So this obviously, I know there's lots of changes has been made, isn't it? Especially within, I know, financial services, investment industry, which we touch on more. So let's start. First question is, so what areas of market research and trend analysis have benefited the most from machine learning and the drive for, machine learning and large language models?
Yeah, I would put it in buckets of machine learning is obviously the place where we would start if we have structured data, but then large language models have opened a lot of opportunities for unstructured data that a lot of financial companies and people doing market research across industries are usually sitting on. A lot of the information that people want to extract insights from are coming in the form of unstructured data. Sometimes could be audio, sometimes could be images too. And large language models are not just the shiny new tool. They really can make a meaningful difference in things that we couldn't have even tapped into in the past and that now are becoming a lot more viable. When we're talking about how do we analyze and generate flexible output formats, if we're trying to, for example, write a memo, or if we're trying to write a summary, large language models come in and completely change the way we do things. It's no longer the case that we need to output a single label or a quick shorthand for what we actually are looking at, but rather generate the full content. So I would say we're sitting on a wealth of data in this industry, unstructured data. And in the case of Berkshire, we've invested both in data and analytics and machine learning before the arrival of foundation models and large language models. But then starting in late 2022, we've been seeing a lot of boost to what we can do with the unstructured data bit of the world. So previously, we were providing insights into specific research questions, could be white space analysis, could be competitive landscapes. Now the field is opened up to a lot more self-serve tools, broad functionalities that we
Mm.
can, our teams and other people are doing the same thing as well, and enhance our operations across a variety of tasks. Some of them will be around surfacing and summarizing long collections of texts or notes or memos. Others involve new interfaces or ingestion of information, historical information that we really didn't make much sense of previously. It could be, but just providing new research tools that go and ask a particular question or look for all mentions of a topic, bring them together across, let's say you do the same check across every file in a collection and then bring together a group summary at the end. So a lot of questions we're trying to answer about how trends change over time, sentiment of customers, comparisons of one company to another, those types of things look completely different now.
So is it just you've been able to open up more markets? Is that what you're saying then? Through the through
So
yeah.
market is an interesting thing. I say the way that we've been seeing it play out so far is we can do the same kind of investigations that we would look to do normally, but just at a much faster scale. And the outcome of that could be, for example, looking at more opportunities at a given time, because one of the bottlenecks we would have in the industry is that you can only really get to the bottom of a research question or of a deal within a set time window, which is usually quite limited. So now you can fast pace through that time window a lot faster, go deeper in our investigations, get more consistent outputs out of them. So it's not just swayed by one person's biases or the reason what they've seen. And then going from that, the hope is that we could also look at more and more opportunities with the same number of resources.
Good. Yeah, no, I think the main thing is because most businesses, the efficiency is just added a lot more value to businesses. The speed is just a massive drive, isn't it? Saving you time, which we all want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Save time is one, and a higher bar of quality and consistency is
Yeah.
the target.
Cool. Okay. And then, so what areas of opportunity do you see or portfolio companies leveraging AI technologies to drive innovation and growth?
Yeah. So I will speak, I think broadly what I'm seeing across industries is that we're looking in our industry for growth levers for our investments. And that, again, cuts across sectors. And there are a couple of things that are particularly promising for what we're seeing. It's the rise of enterprise data, what we can do with it. And from a tech perspective, the barrier to entry is lower than it's ever been. So you no longer need to have a dedicated team painstakingly developing a model for your specific task. You can probably supercharge that, start with an off-the-shelf model that will get you already 70, 80% of the way there based on your data. So that combination gives us a lot of room for growth and for quick wins in ways that previously required a lot of establishment of a lot of local teams and talent and stuff of that kind. And now we can supercharge through that. And we're still seeing a variety of companies at different sizes and at different compositions that take different approaches to how they use the power of their enterprise data and couple that with the lower tech barrier. But we can bring to the table companies that previously couldn't have really even dreamed of using this type of technology. So that means we can tackle both productivity gains. It could be in code development, could be in information surfacing and summarization, could be in customer service or general content generation. But there's also another bucket of innovations and new product offerings. There's a real opportunity in providing valuable information in accessible and novel interfaces. And this could be across audio, video, web, apps, wherever you're accessing your data in whatever forms it comes, we can interact with information in a meaningfully different way. And then we can also expose data to users or stakeholders abstracting away the nitty-gritty details of how you do the data analysis or how do you pull information from data sources you have. We're also
Mm.
seeing virtual assistants and personalized contents that are becoming a lot more viable now. So all of these things, all these use cases together bring a lot of opportunity that cuts across the various industries that we're overseeing.
And are you seeing like differences between, like, say, size of businesses like coming to you? Because okay, the key thing is, obviously, a lot of companies can have all this data, but they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So is that sort of,
Yeah.
I guess,
So
you seeing that a lot? I guess, is it smaller firms having bigger problems, or is it like the larger companies where their data needs to be in a more structured way?
we're seeing a little bit of everything, to be
Okay.
honest. We're meeting our teams where they are. I've seen organizations that have small, savvy teams that are task
Mm.
force. Could be two people going at it, putting something together and getting started based on open source or just off the shelf APIs that they can get started with, and one or two use cases that they're hoping to tackle. They can leverage a lot of the tooling that already exists out there, or they can leverage low code platforms that are being proliferated in this space. There's a bubbling open source community around tooling, especially for LLMs, but also for machine learning more widely. And we've seen some success for smaller teams that have this combination of, let's say, one business champion and one data person going at it together and just dedicating time to it and pushing two use cases together. And then usually they would gather some, traction and appetite from the rest of the business to come along and then spend more resources in that direction. We've also seen medium companies that have a combination of tech and product champions, and then you would see maybe them bringing some external partners into their work. And in that area, I would say there are a few opportunities these days. It could be in the lower code platforms that can also provide some service support as well. It could be in actually startups that are getting started. There are a lot of builders out there that are very excited about the new possibilities and are looking for market fit. And a lot of times they won't have the domain expertise that established companies that already have their own wealth of data and so forth, and a lot of experience in their industry. They can come in and help bridge the gap in a way that will build more general SaaS products perhaps out there, but can still support the use case that companies in the mid-market would have. And putting the right protections in place, that could be a win situation. Other approaches we've seen is bringing in some external support from augmentation services, from build shops that are going more and more in that direction, usually after a first POC that has shown success went through and maybe went to production, and then there's more external collaborators you can bring. And then I would say there are also firms that go all the way to build a new dedicated team around these use cases. I've seen a few of those who see this as a transformational moment that is touching a lot of services or capabilities that are core to their business value. And they have bold initiatives to drive both efficiencies, but also productivity gains and, product innovations in ways that could be quite fundamental for the business. And they would usually start bringing and hire people internally. So those would be in-house built teams with strong AI leadership and data science support around it, usually in communication with either an existing engineering team or some external engineering team support. But really, we've seen a variety of ways people approach it. I would say the main advice that we have in this area is just to have strong business and technical alignment over these things and don't have too many teams going off doing their own side projects without considering a single sort of backbone of tooling, so that we don't end up having multiplicity of tech solutions that are doing the same thing but are not seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see every company's on their data journey. It's just everyone's all over the place, really, isn't it? Everyone's at different challenges. So that's why I think it's just every day's a new day, isn't it? Every day is a learning day because new things are constantly happening and new changes. Yeah, it's never ending. This people in data.
Trying to be in this area for sure.
Okay, brilliant. And then, how do firms assist portfolio companies in implementing AI to improve their operational efficiencies and create a new value proposition? Then.
Yeah. So, first of all, I would say we're helping make all of this a lot more concrete and inject some sense of urgency, especially
Hmm.
for businesses where, again, it touches their core value. I would say we see AI moving from a sort of nice to have to an essential factor to consider. What implications does it have for your business? Let's start having the conversation, see what other people are doing, and then have some workshops around use cases across the value chain for the organization. And where does it touch the core capabilities of AI or machine learning or data more generally? So we meet teams where they are, again, and there's a broad array of team, I would say, scale, size, tech sophistication that we're seeing. And our role has really been to identify the stage where they are. We bring everyone together into a shared learning forum. We meet monthly and share use cases we're seeing across, share vendors we've been talking to, and we're talking to a lot, to constantly be on the forefront of what's being offered and what's being developed around this technology. And then we would hold workshops where we would discuss industry trends and use case prioritization and how to build the right team structure around the chosen priorities. And we would help with vendor matching. We, again, hold a lot of conversations across builders and across solutions being offered. And we will give candidates that we identify as relevant for different use cases. We would try to match them to exactly the team portfolio. Sometimes those would be more self-serve tools, could be whether it is in libraries or in low-code platforms. And sometimes it would be in actual implementation support that we would bring to bear. We also help specifically with POCs and testing. We found that
Hmm.
sometimes people have a hard time getting started. So we need to really define the requirements of, we could identify, for example, a process that could benefit from these tools. And then we would go and define the business value that's attached to it annually. Let's say we look at the volume of, I don't know, documents that they ingest or volume of cases that they serve through this process, understand what parts will the tech impact, and then define a test case with clear success criteria of what would a technical solution for this problem could look like that would, you know, improve on the status quo by X. And this could be in terms of processing time, this could be in terms of processing volume, or let's say countries that we can apply this to, or this could be in terms of accuracy, precision, recall, depends on the use case. We've seen different emphasis there. But we would come along on the process, work through the POC with the team, implement it, see the results, and then help with an evaluation framework going forward. That could be another way
Hmm.
that we would engage. And then once it goes or is close to production, we let the team run with it and support more from the sidelines. We could help with high level advice about progress on specific model development or pipeline development or architectures. And it could also be hands on as well. We have certain resources that we can deploy and we can join in the trenches.
Hmm.
But it depends a little bit on the organization size and the use case profile, whether we would, go in there ourselves or look to partner more broadly.
Yeah, no, I definitely think partnerships are helpful nowadays because if you put, well, it's like mentorship, isn't it? If you work with someone that's been there, done it, bought a t-shirt, it just you get that you build up the speed and it's just you get that knowledge transfer. It's a lot faster, isn't it, than going down the route if you do it yourself and then come across an error or obviously a challenge. And if you've got someone that's already been there, done it, overcome that challenge, it's going to be so much faster and you're going to achieve your goals a lot quicker, aren't you?
Another thing that we found is that we can often have a virtuous cycle of work in, let's say, with one portfolio company, or work that we've seen externally or work that we've done internally can feed into the next project. Because once you've seen what, succeeded and what didn't, or you work through certain pitfalls, you can then advise much more successfully on the next one. So having that broader landscape view helps us be this valuable resource as we continue seeing more projects.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like in sports, isn't it? Everyone's got a coach, been there, done it. So it's that learning, it's their career. So it's the same with data, isn't it? You've got someone that's been there, done it. Yeah, you're gonna achieve your goals a lot faster. Okay, so moving on to the next question. So, what role does natural language processing play in extracting insights from qualitative data to produce detailed market research reports?
Yeah, so I would say, obviously, when we're talking about qualitative data, we cannot overestimate the value of natural language processing. It's really exciting. You heard that reference at the beginning of our conversation to my own personal experience working with natural language process tooling from the early days of Word2 back to where we are now. And it's really quite phenomenal. Whenever we have a large collection of documents that, let's say, discusses the same topic from which we're trying to extract, let's say, all mentions and then understand the sentiment of different speakers in this collection about this topic, and then look for trends over time. These are all natural language process tasks that now, first of all, we can do with single models, which is already phenomenal. All of these used to be individual tasks in previous or in, let's say, more classic machine learning tooling. And now we can be a lot more ambitious as well with the kind of outputs and analysis that we're doing on top of it, because we're not just getting sentiment tagging, we can get a very flexible view to intent gleaning and putting together comparisons of sentiments and putting together comparisons of language patterns and how things are being discussed over time. And all of these come together in the way that we do market research, right? Because a lot of it has to do with understanding how companies are discussing, let's say, certain challenges they're facing, or what management is saying in different conferences or in earnings calls, or whatever you can imagine. It takes those flavors of taking raw utterances and texts as they appear in unstructured documents, and then being able to make meaning of them and reach conclusions about how a topic overall is being discussed and how it compares across documents or across companies or across geographies or across time. All of these different intersections we can do very quickly and efficiently now. And natural language processing is obviously at the heart of it.
And could you imagine a world without it? How much harder would it make your job?
Obviously, we use a lot of these things manually, and you could reach a certain quality and scale within a fixed time frame. But the point is that we're past that now, and you can make meaning of a lot more data.
Yeah, no, cool. Cool. And then can you share any key lessons like investment firms have learned in helping portfolio companies integrate AI? I guess what methodologies have proven to be like most effective as well?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. We tried to distill everything that we've seen so far and came up with, I would say, roughly 7 lessons. The first one I would call ideation, which is really getting into the mindset of how can I leverage my own proprietary data? So far, mostly through RAG systems. I can get into the reasons why we tend to prefer that methodology over others if you're interested. But overall, how can we use this type of technology coupled with my own proprietary data to build differentiated use cases that can introduce either efficiency or product innovation of the kind that we discussed previously? So that would be the first starting point where we would start the discussion with all companies rather than let them run loose with, we've seen this demo here and this demo there. And then taking this core idea, the next step we're talking through is a prioritization function. What does it look like for a given idea? How do we rank it in terms of tech complexity, business value, and risk factors? Sometimes the risk factor is almost like a gate or binary gate of, okay, it's either too risky, so let's not touch it, or it passes the bar and we can live with it. And then we use the tech complexity and the business value as the way forward. Sometimes the risk factor can have shades of gray and mitigations that we can introduce. But I would say these are roughly the factors we want our leaders to have in mind as they're going through the prioritization process. And then we believe in a portfolio of use cases rather than a single one at a time, not go at it sequentially. Some of them will succeed, some of them not so much. But using that ranking of tech feasibility and business value, we would roughly pick 3 to 4 use cases. One of them may be a riskier bet technically, but with a lot of business value. And then the rest would be in the category of lower hanging fruits where we know we can implement and get there fast and also have an attached business value that is lucrative on the side of them. And then there will be a bunch of learnings that you would get in one area that will apply to the rest. Also, a lot of the tooling or the building blocks in one use case can serve both the other use cases or future ones. But the point is that we want to get started and we don't want to get bogged down by the individual idiosyncrasies of one use cases versus another, and also try out a few different approaches to it, but in a way that doesn't recreate the same capabilities, but instead builds on top of them. So it could be, let's say, a couple of platforms where one of them would give you good surfacing abilities and another would be going deeper into analysis. And so you can couple both of them together and then plug and play them into future use cases as well, for example. And then the next thing we've seen, we've learned both as a potential pitfall, but also as a recipe for success, is how do we think about adoption? And the first category we would place there is a two-in-a-box approach. I've referenced that a little bit earlier, but really a combination of business ownership and tech ownership. Not let any of them run too fast without considering the other, especially because when we're talking about generative AI in particular, it's so open-ended, it's so general, outputs can be verbose or subjective, and the domain expertise here is really important in judging what good looks like. And so having that joint ownership and bringing the domain experts to the table, to the development effort, not as an afterthought, can really make or break some of these projects. Building trust in the tools, both from, again, bringing in the end users of the domain experts into the table during development, but also in terms of designing the tools or the UI to build that trust with the user. So showing sources, letting users go deeper into the context that was provided to the model or any reasoning steps or any views of the data. It doesn't have to be forefront at the beginning, but hiding them in some appendices that users can still use in order to validate outputs can be really important and can make the difference in adoption. So really having a transparency of sources as far as we can, and then just a thoughtful change management plan could also make the difference between having a tool that not that many people know about versus driving adoption across organizations. Talent is another interesting category where, again, a lot of people end up thinking that they just are completely excluded from this because they don't have the right talent makeup. But we've already touched upon that a little bit in how we approach that for companies of different sizes. And then feedback, the importance of feedback from experts cannot be downplayed. And then finally, I would say this is going back to your comment earlier about LLMs being just one facet of things. That is another thing we're trying to keep in mind, both of ourselves and of the folks we're working with, that Gen AI is more than just chatbots and more than just large language models themselves. And also there's more to innovation than Gen AI itself. Machine learning tooling and data analysis and data science can still be your best friend if you're trying to work with structured data or if you're trying to build predictive models that put out scores or put out recommendations or put out next best action decisions. And you really need to tailor the right tool to the right problem rather than trying to walk around with a hammer and look for nails.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Because people, like I've seen this, people get sidetracked with the LLM boom. It's like I said, there's so many different models out there, isn't there? I think I've done a podcast before with someone a lady in the railway industry, and they said they've opened up models that just from years ago. It's just actually, it helps. So I think there's so much opportunity out. It's just what's the best answer to solve your problem? I think you need to stay attached to.
Yep. And again, it's an invitation to revisit your use cases and your priorities and then finding the right tech solution, but it doesn't have to be the latest. There are certain bread and butter tools that are just as good today as they've always been.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And then, so what challenges have portfolio companies faced when adopting AI technologies? And I guess how can firms overcome these hurdles?
Yeah. So I think I started mentioning a couple of these issues before, but I would say the biggest pitfalls or the biggest when things go off the rails is when there are too many projects happening at the same time. A
Okay.
lot of them look promising, a lot of them are exciting, but we need to prioritize and we need some level of coordination and we need to put the right resources in place to not just start a project or even get it to a POC that looks nice when you try it and you're not an expert yourself, but have that alignment of business and tech around the solution and have the domain expertise involved there. So I would say the prioritization step is really important rather than trying to chase 10 different things. And then some of them will succeed, some of them will end up in 70% of success, and you'll never go beyond that because you just don't have the resourcing to actually uh,
Yeah.
get it further, or you don't have the energy in your domain expertise resources to continue providing feedback across 10 solutions, right? And they can very quickly get fatigued and just claim that the whole thing or the whole technology is rotten and not
Yeah.
very useful, and you'll never get anywhere. That's the reason why, in the lessons that we've learned, I would put prioritization at an important place because it needs to happen early in the process, and it will both bring the right level of energy from across the organization, but also avoid these cases where it's either one make or break, or it's too many things going on at the same time and having, or maybe even solving the same problem again and again across different use cases in the organization. Bringing that alignment and trying to bubble things up, even if certain projects are bottom up rather than top down, bubbling it up to the right level and then having the business prioritization at some management level can really help bring the alignment and make the difference in somewhat successful projects or those that just get abandoned. Yeah.
So do you see, I mean, everyone's got good, a lot of businesses, obviously, they've got great ideas. So do they just come to you with a million and one ideas and really they should just have a core focus on what's going to get you the best impact?
Yeah, so I would say the way we would approach it is usually there's a list. A lot of people across an organization may have their own opinions about how to solve problems that they see in their day to day,
Mm-hmm.
or they see opportunities for playing around with tooling and so forth. And then maybe there would be a list of 10 things. What we would do with them is either try to score them based on tech feasibility and business value, and really understand what would be the annual impact in terms of either whether it's dollars saved or whether it's markets gained or whether it is new capabilities or freeing up resources to do other things. There could be different flavors of what business value could look like. But the point is doing that ranking and then taking the risk into account as that third column and start bringing some organization into it and bubble certain things very obviously up. But I would say another exercise that we would do is actually try to bring the right stakeholders across the organization. And usually we would, work with the management to identify who those are and sit through an in-person workshop, ideally going through the value chain of their respective parts of the organization and really name what could be use cases that make use of technology A versus technology B, and then putting them on that grid of business value versus feasibility of implementation. Like really it's a scatter plot. And then trying to identify the top 3 to 4 points. So it will be a group business value and feasibility and of implementation from a technical perspective. And then we would identify the 3 to 4 use cases that are at the top half of the scatter plot in terms of business value. Identifying one that is, again, a bit more of a technically complex project that's a bit of a moonshot. That's a healthy one goal to have, but then mixing it in with 2, 3, 4 other use cases, depending on the size of the organization and their resources, but ones that are lower hanging fruits that can serve the learning across the firm, that can get us to the right tooling. Even if the moonshot doesn't completely go as planned, we would still make progress on the lower hanging fruits. but also not focus too conservatively just on things that we know how to take things off the shelf and implement immediately. It's okay to be a bit more daring on one of these projects. And that way we usually identify the big ticket items to go after.
Yeah. No, 'cause I think that's one thing we do here from a lot of companies is they've got so many things they want to do, and then it's again, you need to stay there. And it's staying core to your objective, isn't it? What's the best thing to achieve? Because you can easily get sidetracked. There's so many things going on, isn't there? Like business, and I guess it's also going to be conversations in the business, isn't it? Because everyone's objective is going to be different to whatever role they're in, really, isn't it? It's going to affect people differently.
Absolutely. But I think strong mandates from management are very helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely. Cool. So what common misconceptions about AI and how are they addressed with portfolio companies?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. One common thing I've seen in conversations with especially business leaders, but sometimes also technical folks who've worked with classical ML, but not so much with newer AI ways, especially foundation models, is the idea that they're going to self-improve by seeing more data. In theory, it would be possible if we can continue training these gigantic models in terms of compute and data forever to do the very specific task that we mean them to do in our context. But in practice, we often take pre-existing, pre-trained models, and then we continue doing something on top of them. Usually we would build a pipeline on top of them and not even retrain them with our own data. We could take a fine-tuning approach, but it's not the most feasible track for a lot of enterprises because it would require a lot of maintenance. You would give up on a lot of the generalizability of outputs. You can tune them very specifically to your data and your task, but you would also need to keep maintaining them, keep them up to date. In terms of source citations, if that's important for your use case, it will be a lot harder, if not impossible, compared to taking a RAG approach to your use case. And if that's what you're going with and you are using a pre-trained model and just adding your data as context to model outputs, it's not going to self-improve quite in the way that your classic machine learning models that distinguish dogs and cats would do by just providing them more pictures of dogs and cats that you see in the real world. And it's also not the case that our objective functions are as targeted as they used to be. Estimating loss on the particular task that you're about to achieve when the output is so open-ended and so verbose is quite a different task. So the question of how to evaluate model outputs becomes a lot more interesting and a lot more crucial, but also less automatic. And some of the ways we've seen people tackle that is by collecting feedback and trying to tune different essentially hyperparameters of these pipelines. So it could be our chunking strategy, it could be your prompt, it could be even updating some of the metrics that you may have going on in the model to kind of, it could be a checklist approach, it could be a matching approach of what you're expecting to see in the model output in like a response to a question that they give compared to some ground truth that you may have had from historical cases or you may refine based on user feedback. There are these different approaches, but it's not going to be a self-improving, automatic, agentic system almost. No, agentic is the wrong word here. But it's not going to self-improve on its own unless you either create that feedback loop for self-learning or you just use it to make more manual tweaks yourself in your model.
Yeah.
And so it's an important misconception and something that's worth thinking about, not as an afterthought. It's not just a thing you throw at the model at the end, quite like it used to be.
Okay. Interesting to hear different misconceptions there. And then obviously we touched on LLMs and importance of data quality. So can you discuss the importance of data quality and governance in successfully implementing AI initiatives, specifically for portfolio companies?
Yeah, so I'll tackle it in two chunks. First, data quality. It's obviously important. As always, with any learning system, we're reliant on the data that we're providing the model for any representation that it has of the world. That is not changing. But if we are working with foundation models, they enable us to access data in its raw form in ways that we couldn't have done before. So we can do it across modalities. We can take in raw files or documents or speech or recordings as they exist in the world. And we don't need to spend as much time cleaning it up, converting it across formats, or designing features very carefully for predictive models like we used to do. So I would say I would encourage teams to start looking at the data that they have in its raw form and see how far they can get with playing around with it with the models as is. The pipelining of data and the provision of the right pieces to answer certain questions is very important. But as long as you've piped the right data in, I would start by using the raw format as much as I can and then go from there and learn about what the limitations could be. But I wouldn't chase my own tail trying to clean data very carefully or structure it very carefully in ways that I may have done a few years ago. Another difficulty that I've heard, it's a different take on the data quality angle, but for evaluations and for improvement of models, one approach is to try to come up with a gold standard of what the output needs to look like. And one thing we've seen is that if the task is complex enough, let's say we're trying to generate a full memo, or let's say we're trying to generate a full letter that we're sending in response to something, it's often the case that humans don't agree with themselves about how to perform this task or what the gold standard actually looks like. And so what we've seen to be more successful is actually just to get started based on historical outputs that you have out there, regardless of trying to answer the question of it's the gold standard that is the most perfect form that could ever be, and then just respond to feedback that you collect quickly to the outputs you're starting to generate. So I would say don't try to be perfect from the get-go, get started, and then have recurring improvements going forward. And then on the governance front, I think it can be very important to define what success metrics actually look like and what good enough is. Because for a lot of these tasks, even if you complete it with a 70 precision, let's call it, that could already have massive business impact. So as long as we keep ourselves focused on what's the right goal and what is an improvement at all on top of the current state, we can be a lot more, we can keep making progress rather than get bogged down in, again, conversations about what perfect looks like. The other thing is, from a governance perspective, I would say try to make sure that you don't have, again, too many efforts taking overlapping approaches to solving the same fundamental problems. Try to build on each other's work and then get alignment again across the business and the tech teams. Track progress in terms of those good enough metrics that you've identified, and then respond to any roadblocks or performance degradations that you've hit after the fact and have some mitigations for what happens if you do go off the rails occasionally. But I would say all of these things should be in mind of the governance structure that you put in place.
Okay, cool. And then obviously, it's technologies with data, technologies, it's all moving quick, isn't it? So I guess how can firms keep up to date with advancements in AI? Because that's a constant challenge, especially if you're progressing into more of a like leadership role when you're away from the tools, should we say. That's the hard bit, isn't it? To get that fine line. So what's your advice there?
Look, we're all struggling these days. It's changing every day. There's more and more out there. Fortunately, there are a lot of nice resources as well. Some of them are enabled by the tools themselves. A lot of great summarization newsletters, like AI News is a great resource that what's happening in Reddit and what's happening in GitHub and what's happening across social media. I found that to be a very helpful kind of aggregation summarization that I can look into daily. Reddit is obviously another place to look. We have the fortunate place and platform to meet with a lot of vendors and a lot of innovators and builders out there. So that is another aspect where we keep learning about what exists out there and then bring it back to the teams we're working with. Conferences could still be a great place. Of course, things are moving so fast now online that it feels like the conferences are lagging behind, but you can still establish these new connections and have a single venue where you see more names and more players out there, and it can be quite useful. And then we are bringing all of that back together, let's say, to our working groups, to our shared forums, where we can disseminate some of the learnings and learn from each other, to be honest. The more people you have in your network, the more you get to cover. And then we constantly think about how to stay ahead, not just stay in line with what's happening. And I think doing all of these things and then keeping keeping an eye out across the organization for what people seeing and bringing it all back together to consult and to collaborate on efforts, it just multiplies our coverage.
Brilliant. And yeah, cool. That's a wrap then. Really appreciate your time, Limor, today. It's been a pleasure having you on. Some really great insights there.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Ben.
Brilliant. Thank you.